To get settled. I'm actually going to stay down here this time so I can interview y'all. Feel free to interrupt with follow-up questions. Just raise a hand or come over to the empty mic. Let's keep this very informal. The point of this next session is to dig a little bit more into the details, and I think I'd like to start with data. Which I think is a concern for everyone here. We want to know, what's entailed in ensuring that these programs are working. What is it? What are you doing to track students? How difficult is that? And maybe any guidance that you have, sort of must-dos if you're going to start a program like this, knowing what you know in hindsight. What are the must-haves, must-dos in launching the program in terms of tracking student outcomes? Anyone can start.
Okay, I'll give it a start. I think the way we've conceived of the program, it is very data-centered. So in order for one to make the kind of quick decisions that have to be made, my argument is that you do need to have data at your fingertips. It has to be readily available and sound in several areas. One, some kind of academic marker, because you've heard that as a recurring theme, that these grants are only awarded to students who are good academic risks. Now, you've heard different models out there. Some of them may be as simple as looking at GPA. We at Georgia State are actually using predictive analytics to make sure that the students by the predictive analytics have a good chance of graduating. The other is some kind of financial data readily available. And we are already at Georgia State calculating the levels of unmet need for every student every semester at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. But having that at your fingertips or the fingertips of those making the decisions is absolutely critical. And without that kind of data availability, we couldn't have launched the program in the format that we did.
You heard most of our outcome measures, so the metrics that we were following. In addition, we did do a student survey to get information on their sense of what happened, particularly in terms of coaching. But what we do try to do with each new initiative is look at what the outcome measures are going to be before we start the program, so that we can be prospective in thinking about data collection rather than going back afterwards and trying to figure out how to assess the success of the program.
I'll say I don't have a lot more to add. You're hearing, I think, what are the critical pieces, at least for us. To the extent you keep it simple and you'll be able to sustain it. So have the right offices involved. You've got to have the kind of metrics that Tim talked about. Otherwise, you really can't launch the program, at least in the way that we've done it. And then your outcome measures, keep them simple. You are tracking persistence, you're tracking retention, you're tracking graduation rates. Just make sure you've tagged your grant recipients also, so they're easily accessible in your enterprise systems to pull, so you can see exactly how those specific students are tracking. But keep it consistent with things that you already track to the extent possible. Add what you need to, and make sure your financial aid and your institutional research offices know exactly what you're doing, so that that information flows easily and it becomes just part of what you report on broadly as you're looking at all of your retention, persistence, and completion metrics.
Yes, I would agree with the other panelists, and I would just add two things very quickly. The first of which is involve the students in the process. For us, we actually had focus groups with our students to say, if we offered this type of support, what areas do we need to address? So they helped determine the criterion that they were going to use, that we were going to use in order to facilitate this, because it is for them. And then secondly, we on the front end, and then secondly, we involve them in meetings with our donors, in part because they can tell a story that we can as administrators. And so they're on the front end in designing the process, they're recipients of the process, and then we use them in meetings with our donors so that our donors actually see their dollars being administered on our campus.
Mm-hmm. And I know some of you are tracking student participants maybe in a separate database or an Excel spreadsheet. Is anyone tracking individual students and their participation in these grants as well as other student support services in a campus information system?
I will start there because I'm going to say one of my biggest recommendations is you track as much as you can in your central enterprise systems, just because if you don't already know those systems well, you will learn it, and everybody on campus who needs to support you then can be helping and make that much simpler. One of the biggest problems I think that exists is we all track data in all these different ways, and they're not accessible to others on campus. So to the extent possible, track them in your student database system is my recommendation. It's reasonably easy to do, even if there's anybody in the room who does not know their system well or doesn't like it. It really is. It's really, once you work with your folks in IT and IR, it's easy to do, to create student groups and to track throughout and get what you need out of it, and then it's always there. It's in a central system, and it's easily accessible. So we track all of ours in the central database.
Okay. All right. And what are some ways that you've used data with any stakeholders? Some examples would be helpful.
A couple examples. First, with the internal stakeholder. We've heard several times here the return of investment. One of the things I've been able to do in the enrollment side of the house is talk about how this program helps a program and a particular major. Traditionally, at this point in time, we have a major that annually about 25% of the major just disappears in the spring. And that's in part because they're actually going to Alaska to work on fishing boats. That's just the nature of that major. Well, because we administer the grant, that number has gone down to between 5 to 8% per year because we're able to administer the grant. So that actually helps the retention of that major. That's a part of using the data. Another part for us is that because we're so heavily invested within our community, we use it as a way of keeping the community informed about what we're doing, even from the high school perspective. Students from this high school have a certain profile, and we're able to show where our support for these high school students and with our donors is able to get them through completion and back into our community with four-year degrees.
A couple additional audiences I'll mention. If you're wanting to launch this program, make a partner of your chief financial officer on campus. I will say at Georgia State, our CFO was initially quite skeptical about the program and is now one of the biggest supporters on campus, and it has been very useful in coming up with creative ways to build upon the pool of money we have available. I also brought it to the head of the Georgia State Foundation, and I actually presented multiple times in front of different foundation audiences. Again, sharing the data. A lot of those foundations in this day and age are made up of business leaders. That's certainly true at Georgia State, where we're right in a big corporate center in Atlanta. And this is language that resonates with those people, that you can make the ROI types arguments and show the data and so forth. And it's not quite the data, but I'll also put on the table pull on some heartstrings here as well, not in an empty and facile way, but these are really lives that are being transformed for, in some cases, a few $100s. And we have been quite intentional about getting some of the very thankful students who have received these grants out in front of different audiences, including donors, including legislators. Another big advocate of this program in Georgia, by the way, is the chancellor of the university system, who loves the program so much that he gave it an award and has been promoting it to the other 29 public universities across the state of Georgia. A couple of the students who benefit from these programs and tell their stories about how they were basically going to be dropped out and stopped out and maybe dropped out, and how this relatively small amount transformed them can be very, very effective.
Anyone else? What about any advice that you might have, since everyone's functioning with limited resources? What are some options for getting that sort of external evaluation support for the program on campus, off campus? Do you have any suggestions or ideas? Or how have you done it on your campus?
Well, I think several people have talked about the opportunities to reach out to different external constituencies and try to convince them that they would like to help support students. That's always a challenge. One of the things that's not external but internal within our institution is we continue to look at ways of how excuse me, we can better use the institutional aid that we have. So it's always nice when you get money from the outside that you weren't expecting, but that doesn't always happen. And so being very careful to analyze how we're using our aid and what we might do, and continuing to tweak programs and not being afraid to stop one program and move it into a different direction, I think is really important to maximizing the benefit of what we can do.
I will say, the first thing, that return on investment has been the most promising part for us. It makes it to the point where it's not questioned. It's just, and you begin to be able to make the argument that if you don't do it, the institution will lose money. And so that's attractive to the CFO. I agree with Tim. To anybody who's just the institution bottom line, it makes it just not a question. So using that kind of data, I think with the potential for your donors as well. The other piece, though, that is intriguing to me and that I think we want to use more of is, at least in our case, and many of you may have already, fixed some of this on your campuses, most of our scholarship dollars still go towards, if you think, now Akron is not quite open admissions, but it's pretty close. And so, most of the scholarship dollars coming in, though, are still devoted to the smaller percentage of students on the high end of that, whether it's ACT, high school GPA. And so these are really, these are the students in the middle that are getting these grants. And so, that is an attractive thing we want to do more with. The students who are getting these grants are ones typically who, most of them did not qualify for that kind of merit scholarships in the beginning. There are students who, at least in our case, using our data analytics, we're losing them in the highest percentages after the first years. Those students in the middle, they're sitting in that 2.25 and to around 3.0 GPA, so they're doing okay, but they're not quite, they may not be the superstars, but they're doing okay with a little bit more support, and particularly with the financial help. You really help a large group of students who maybe, and at least in our case, I'll say for us, get a little bit forgotten in the mix when they're first coming into the institution.
Thank you.
I'll add one other source that I didn't think to mention. Because our state funding is in part performance-based, we had a biennium in which more money came to our institution than we had thought was going to come. And so a portion of that additional funding was put into need-based aid with the premise that the more students we graduate, then the more funding we're going to get from the state in the next cycle. So being able to make a case to use that performance-based funding in a way that will get us more dollars in the future is another aspect of the ROI to include.
Thank you. I think folks would like to hear a little bit about costs to the extent that you're able to speak about it. I'm not referring to the grant dollars themselves, but what is the cost of implementing this program? There are some grant dollars available, but those don't last forever. So if someone creates a program like this, what can they anticipate it costing year over year to manage it?
I can start a little bit. The best part is you can start with however much money you think you can dedicate to this. So whether you start with grant dollars and you have $10,000, or you start with institutional aid that you divert to this and you have $5,000, you can do something with that money. Then once you get started, that's what I love about this